Many of us celebrated earlier this week when the Supreme Court kicked off Pride Month with a landmark win for LGBTQ equality in this country. The majority ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination because of sex, extends to people who face job bias arising from their sexual orientation or gender identity. Justice Neil Gorsuch, in writing the majority opinion, said, "The message of the law is simple and momentous. An individual's homosexual or transgender status is not relevant to employment decisions. That's because it is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual based on sex." Though we still have a long way to go until we reach a time when all people feel proud, fully accepted, and loved by their families and society, let us appreciate this significant milestone in the fight for equity and justice. I do not take for granted this moment in history or the profound events in my life over the last 2 years. I was ordained a rabbi, a title which only became legal for queer Jews to hold in the conservative movement in 2006. I got to marry the love of my life in 2018, 3 years after marriage equality became the law of the land. And 6 months ago, I joyously became a mother on my own terms. I am so grateful to live in a time and place in Jewish and American history when I can fulfill my dreams. But of course, we have not yet reached the promised land for all. As a nation, we have yet to confront and conquer transphobia. While anti-gay bias has declined in the U.S., hostility to trans people remains pervasive, from ignorant tweets by celebrities to legal disputes over bathroom stalls and the president's attempts to discriminate against transgender people in the healthcare system and military. The Human Rights Campaign reported in 2019 at least 27 deaths of transgender or gender nonconforming individuals in the U.S. due to fatal violence. The majority of those killed were African American transgender women. And there have already been at least 15 such deaths reported in 2020. The Human Rights Campaign writes, "These victims, like all of us, are loving partners, parents, family members, friends, and community members. They worked, went to school, and attended church. They were real people, people who did not deserve to have their lives taken from them." Pride Shabbat reminds us to stand up for the transgender community and to offer respect and support to transgender individuals in our lives, to speak out whenever we encounter ignorance, cruelty, or bigotry. In Parashat Shelach, we read about 12 scouts, one man from each tribe, who were sent to survey the land of Canaan, the land God promised to the Israelite people. The scouts report back that the land is beautiful and fertile, indeed flowing with milk and honey. But 10 of the scouts are overwhelmed by fear of the land's inhabitants. "The people who dwell in this country are powerful," they say. "We cannot attack that people, for they are stronger than we. All the people that we saw are men of great size." Panicked and demoralized, the scouts describe the inhabitants of Canaan as Anakites, or Anak in Hebrew, a word that suggests primordial giants. In vivid, metaphoric speech, they reveal how small and inadequate this encounter made them feel. "V'nihi ve'einenu kechagavim, v'chein hayinu be'eineihem." We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. Our sages ask, the scouts may have known how they felt, but how could they know how they appeared to others? And the Gemara explains that when the Israelite scouts saw the Canaanites, they hurriedly climbed up nearby cedar trees. And from there, they heard the Canaanites say, "We see people who look like grasshoppers in the trees." In other words, it's all a matter of perspective. Viewed high above in the cedar trees, which are known for their enormous height, the scouts looked small to the Canaanites and saw themselves as powerless. This implies, however, that had they stood before the Canaanites face to face, confident and self-assured, they could have appeared of normal stature. the scouts let themselves be defined by others' perceptions. Fear distorted their thinking and made them believe they were not up to the task of conquering the land and living their dreams. The Israelites' struggle against odds that feel overwhelming is a story that resonates in our personal lives. We relive it whenever we feel small, inadequate, dwarfed by the challenge that confronts us. And our ancestors' struggle resonates especially on this Pride Shabbat. Rabbi Camille Shira Angel teaches that many of us, when we considered coming out and living our lives as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, faced an ordeal of epic proportions, a territorial battle for autonomy and self-definition. Likewise, we too were faced with the imposing, if not threatening, dominant culture, the gigantic power and privilege of mainstream thinking. In this passage of Torah, the contrast between the giants and the spies represents a duality between the normative versus the other, the dominator versus the dominated. The heavy residue of slave mentality veils the spies' ability to see their own strength and the divine shield. Conditioned to think of themselves as inferior, the Israelite scouts do not recognize their own power or God's power to help them face any obstacles in their path, and their panic infects the rest of the people, who retreat in fear, never to enter the promised land. And the battle for self-respect goes on. Again and again, we come to learn as a people that when we confront external enemies, we develop a sense of our own dignity, competence, and strength. While transphobia is a real threat in this country and makes many in the transgender community feel like grasshoppers, I hope that the Supreme Court's decision this week makes them feel like giants, confident and proud, respected as equal citizens in this country. May we all feel like giants, knowing that we are capable of defeating ignorance and hate through our own activism, love, and pride, strengthened now by the law of the land. We haven't yet made it all the way, but look how far we have come. I want to echo the words of Jaya Kolhol, a Bethel teenager who spoke at last year's Coming Out Shabbat. For I too stand on the shoulders of all those LGBTQ activists who came before me and fought for our civil rights. Thanks to them, I can see the promised land before us, a place of equality, dignity, and respect for all people.